Hello and welcome to Coast Compliance. I'm Lou McCurry and this is our very first show. Welcome. We're planning to make this a short, sharp and fun fortnightly series where we plan to provide a rundown of Microsoft Compliance Solutions news. We're also planning to make this as locally relevant as possible. So we'll be looking at the Australian angle wherever possible. In order to cover the breadth of Australia, it stands to reason that we need two of us to host. And so with that, I'd like to introduce the incredible Beau Fall. Where do we find you today, Beau?
Thanks for that, Lou. So I'm Beau Fall. I'm a technology specialist at Microsoft based out of Perth, Western Australia, hence the name Coast to Coast. I've recently rediscovered a love for Lego. So we've recently had a new store open up in Perth. I think it's the first official Lego store we actually have ever had. And I've been doing a lot more Lego building with my son, particularly the Star Wars stuff, which he's really, really keen on. How about you, Lou? What do you want to tell the viewers about yourself?
That's really cool. I've got two daughters and they were quite musical for a while they were growing up, and I'm a musician as well. So that's my passion, both playing music and listening to it, obviously. And so, but like you, I'm a technology specialist based here in Melbourne, Victoria. And to Beau's point, hence the Coast to Coast, we're covering both West Coast and out here on the East Coast as well. So Beau, tell us what's coming up in the show.
Yeah, so this week, and obviously it's our first episode, so we're not having a guest that we would typically have. This is more of an introduction, a meet to greet to me and Lou, and kind of get an understanding of the format that we're looking to run. So we're going to be covering news from the world of compliance, Microsoft information protection and governance. We'll have a rundown of what's new and exciting in the world of Microsoft compliance solutions and how they specifically apply to Australia, where we're able to do so. We'll also have a brief show and tell of something cool and interesting. It's going to be a brief demo of some of the capabilities and technologies and what we find interesting. We're not looking to do any massive PowerPoint slides or anything within this show. It's going to be all practical experience. Yeah, exactly, right? Not death by PowerPoint, which I think is a good change of pace. We plan to have a guest, like I mentioned before, in future shows. So we'll be bringing in someone from Microsoft, talk about what they do, what they're excited about, maybe show off a couple of bits of technology that they're working on, and let us know if you're interested in joining us in the future. And lastly, at the end, we're going to do something a little less formal, but feel free to stay tuned. But let's start with some news, Lou. What have you got that's kind of interesting? What's exciting you this week?
Thanks, mate. I've been having a lot of compliance manager conversations with customers. And believe it or not, compliance manager is quite exciting. There's a lot there in compliance manager for anybody who is having to deal with regulatory requirements, but even people who need to think about how they're going to go down the zero trust path, for argument's sake, or how they're going to start thinking about rolling out their Essential 8 initiatives and things like that. So not only is Compliance Manager a way to report back your compliance if you're being audited, but it's a great way to manage the process of actually conforming to those requirements and providing some best practice as well within the tool. So we'll have a look at that later on during my session, but in terms of updates, we've had some massive updates in Compliance Manager, specifically around Zero Trust. I want to walk you through some of those changes, about 460 or something like that, 400 and something updates to the assessments in Compliance Manager. We've got some brand new Essential 8 assessment templates as well that cover all three of the maturity levels, which is great to see. So I'll walk you through some of that later on. Look, the other big news is, and literally we're recording this obviously a little bit earlier than you're probably watching this, but literally this morning, the team behind the Microsoft Information Protection Service has released some Ninja training. And if you're new to Ninja training, what this is some very, very detailed and graded training materials. It's beautifully put together. There's some self-assessment capability in there. There's also ability to generate some certification for yourself as well. So if you're looking for training around Microsoft Information Protection, there's no better source than the actual engineers who manage and create the product. Beau, what's new in your world?
Yeah, so on top of the information protection Ninja training that's come out, and that's been really heavily requested by customers. I think one of the key things to note there is Ninjas steal things. They don't pay for it. So it is free training. On top of that, I've been focusing on privacy management. So it's a new capability that's recently been released, and it's been developed to help address an organization's privacy concerns. So it's made to go out and proactively identify and protect against privacy risks. So things like, let's think of data oversharing, that as well as providing some additional visibility on the storage and management of that data within M365. So it will go through, it'll have a scan, it'll detect any PII within your environment, any potential breaches or privacy concerns, and report that back. It also helps if subjects' rights request or freedom of information request, this is a bit more appropriate to us. It automates that process and searches and collects data from M365 and helps produce a report. So that just takes away the onus of you having to assign a member of staff to go through and manually trawl through this data, bring out the report, and then provide it to the requester. This automates that process. So it takes a lot of time out of it. The other thing that I've been really keen working on, and I've had a lot of discussions with customers, is Adaptive Scopes has gone into public preview. So typically when we were using static scopes in retention policies within information governance, so that's where we're either saying that this data should be kept or deleted after a particular period of time. This lets people target those retention policies to specific users, groups, or SharePoint site attributes. So we can start saying things like, if an active AAD person has a field, let's say country is Australia, we can start putting that scope in the actual portal itself and then tailor those policies to those groups. So it provides us a little bit more of that granular control that we didn't have before. These adaptive scopes also aren't limited to the policy limits that some of the static scopes are. So depending on what you're looking to do with a static retention policy, there would be a limit of 1,000 or 100. It would be your limitation on how many times that scope gets limited to. So this doesn't get, those don't appear to work on adaptive scopes. Those policies don't apply. So we have an almost unlimited amount that we can scope those policies to. We've also got a new policy lookup tool where you can look up a user or a SharePoint site, for example, and see the exact policies that have been applied to that user, SharePoint site, etc. So it gives you that really clear visibility as to what policies and what retention periods have been applied to particular sites or users. And I guess last thing, Lou, something that we're both excited about is Ignite is next week. So that's going to be a whole bunch of announcements. That's not specifically only for compliance. It covers the entire Microsoft ecosystem, and you should really tune into that. We should obviously highlight that this is pre-recorded before Ignite. So all of those massive things that come out of Ignite that we'd really like to talk about will have to be done in a future episode. So Lou, I'll hand over to you to do a bit of a show and tell on something that's exciting you this week.
Thanks, buddy. And you're probably, as Bo's pointed out, watching this post-Ignite, so your minds are probably already blown by what you've seen. And if you haven't gone there yet or you've missed it, the sessions do get recorded, so you can always come back and check them out. So let me share my screen with you, Bo.
Yeah, feel free.
Let me sort this out. Here we go. So we're looking at the first of the updates that I was talking about earlier around Compliance Manager. And in fact, you're looking at our Compliance Manager solution here at compliance.microsoft.com, where all of our compliance solutions reside. And specifically, and let's minimize that so we don't have a visual distraction. And Bo, I need to get you out of the fray as well. There we go. So what you're seeing here is our list of assessment templates. Now, this is by no means going to be a deep dive in Compliance Manager, and we're really just going to be providing some highlights here. Really invite you to come back and let us know if you want us to go deeper in any areas, but we'll also provide some pointers later on where you can go deep on all this stuff. The Ninja Guide is a great start, just saying. So in the assessment templates, the idea is that we will provide regulatory frameworks here in the form of assessment templates. And if you've done this with spreadsheets in the past, you know it's a painful process. But here you'll see, for example, the data protection baseline for Microsoft 365. This is really a greatest hits compilation album. You know, we're taking elements of NIST, we're taking elements of ISO 27001 and a bunch of other frameworks, and we're pulling them together into an aggregated assessment template that provides our customers with some really good fundamental guidance and controls around your compliance, but also a nice baseline in terms of configuring your environment for the sake of security or meeting some of your zero trust challenges. And in fact, if we double click and have a look at this, you'll notice that when I jump in and look at the controls themselves, There's a lot in here, but a big addition recently has been all these zero trust controls that we've added to that assessment baseline. So yes, it's definitely worth your while investigating all the controls and just being really thorough about this. But if your first requirement, if your urgent need is to just get started and get some real good guidance on zero trust, you can't really go further than Compliance Manager. And you'll see in here that what you end up seeing is and getting is a lot of guidance, very prescriptive guidance, in fact. And when we drill in, you'll see, for example, discover and control the use of shadow IT. Just one example. Let's drill in, have a look at exactly what's involved here. And we're being told that, there's a couple of improvement actions here that really should be undertaken. The concept of an improvement action is something your administrators need to do, something you need to do, as opposed to something Microsoft does at the service end in order to provide that compliance, if you like. And again, drilling in the next level deep, you'll see just how prescriptive and how detailed this guidance is. This is more than just simply ticking boxes for the sake of an audit. There's a lot of capability in here to actually manage the process of working your way through these administrative tasks. And as you're doing that, you are satisfying these requirements around, in this case, your zero trust journey. I'll give you another example of that kind of logic where it's great to see all these templates in here. And yes, certainly, if we're undergoing an audit, we need to work our way through a template specifically and meet all those requirements. But again, if my pressing concern might be something around, let's say the COVID-19 situation we're all experiencing at the moment, we're all going to be faced with challenges as we come back into the workplace and come out of lockdown. And that's for some of us. I know, Bo, lockdown is a foreign concept to you because you're living in Perth and it's like in another planet. But, COVID's coming for you, and like everyone else, of course, you're going to have to be dealing with things like proof of vaccination. There'll be a lot of communication amongst employers, between employers and employees, around immunization and potentially even some resistance or perhaps some chatter around the impact of vaccine mandates and things like that. So lots of implications, lots of privacy implications here as well, of course. So if I did a quick search here just on privacy, one of the templates you'll find coming up in the list here, it's quite a comprehensive list, but the Australia Privacy Act for Microsoft 365 is a great place to start. And I know that because despite the fact it's a federal framework, there's still very good guidance in here. And you'll find that in this case, if I was to do a search here specifically on COVID, you'll find there's already a lot of guidance in here and a lot of controls and privacy implications. And if I was to single out a couple of examples, this is a very straightforward one. There's a requirement here that COVID application data is not retained. Retaining this kind of personal health information of your employees is going to become a legal liability. So the way we attach that, or the way we manage that, is to think about applying retention labels, automating the ability to identify and then dispose of potentially personal private information, which might become a legal liability. And look, the last thing I'll show you here, because there is so much to walk through, and again, this is just a taster today, because I want to keep this short and sweet, is I wanted to highlight the fact that in these templates, let's have a look at the Essential 8. We do have a good range of templates here that do cover the separate maturity levels as well. So no matter what maturity level of the Essential 8 framework you're trying to aim for, you might be beginning with level 1. Let's focus on that. And there's flexibility here to say, for argument's sake, well, we're looking at a maturity level 2, but we want to ensure that some of our service providers or contractors are actually complying at a higher level or lower level. We can add multiple assessments and discreetly track that as well. So look, I'm going to stop there because there is a lot to cover, and we need to be short, sharp, and sweet in these coast-to-coast compliance sessions. But look, I'll hand over to you, Bo. Is there anything exciting? What are you going to show us today for your show and tell?
Yeah. I'll dive into adaptive scopes and show you how they're configured, where they live, and like what they do.
Yes,
But
please.
something I wanted to mention on Compliance Manager really quickly is if you're coming in at from an audit perspective, knowing when some of those controls have changed and mapping that has been a really time-consuming task. Within Compliance Manager, Microsoft will go ahead and advise you when one of these regulations or one of these controls might have changed. And that just saves you having to constantly have a look and the framework's been redeveloped and the new controls in place. How do we meet these things? And Compliance Manager will go through and do that for you.
Bo, I'm glad you reminded me while you were talking. I've just brought up that screen. I did forget to show that update process just to highlight the fact that, yep, this is not a one-off. When you bring in these templates, we will maintain them. And in this case, you'll see we did an update October the 15th, where there were 467 changes added. And you can see here the vast majority of what was added was in fact the zero trust controls that I was just walking you through. Yeah. And the very last thing before we hand over, Bo, is how much would you expect to pay for the data protection baseline and compliance manager?
Luckily, they are completely free with your licensing. So as long as we're using, let's say, E3 licenses, for example, all of that stuff is covered within the data protection baseline. So you can go in there today, enable it, get a good idea of what's actually happening within your environment, and start putting evidence in there that you're trying to meet some of these controls. So that's all completely free.
Yep. And just to be absolutely clear, we're talking specifically about the data protection baseline. So there is more implications around licensing beyond that, of course. But if you like what you're seeing on the screen right now, there's no reason for you not to spin this up right now and get started. And with that, I will hand over to you now, Bo, for the adaptive scopes.
Yeah, no problems at all.
Show me.
That's it. Yeah, we're all timed. We're already in sync and everything. All right, let's jump over to adaptive scopes. So I'll jump over across to my demo environment here. So we're, again, in the compliance portal. So we're in the compliance.microsoft.com portal here. We're just going to go down to the information governance section. This exists both within the information governance section and records management. So it's a feature used for both. And retention labels, just to do a brief understanding before I dive into adaptive scopes, the labels that you apply to documents to put retention or deletion actions on them. So we can say, keep this data for 7 years and then trigger what's called, let's say, a disposition review, where someone's got to come in, approve that deletion of that data, and that purges the data out of the system. We can also say that that data can't be deleted for that 7 years. So even if someone tries to delete it, they'll either be blocked or it can get moved into an archived SharePoint library so that data is retained. When we start talking about retention policies, they are policies that are applied more broadly. So they're like a default policy applied to either an environment, or when we start talking about adaptive scopes in this instance, a group of users or something based on an AD attribute. So that's kind of the differentiation. You can think of retention labels as at a file level. Retention policies are more broad at a location or user specific level. So I'll dive into adaptive scopes really quick. And you can see I've created two really briefly here. We've got this one here that has a query that's searching for a country or region. And this is in either Azure AD or an M365 group. And it's targeted to anyone that exists within Australia. We can have a look at another one I've created, and this is a multi-query retention adaptive scope. And that's got a country of Germany, and that department has to be IT. So this scope, once we put it in a retention policy, would only apply to people located in Germany and are part of the IT department. As a lot of people are going to know, you're going to have different retention requirements based on, say, department. Maybe legal has a different retention policy. HR typically does. Depends on kind of how your company is structured and what you're looking for. But a lot of the time, a static scope, let's say 7 years across everything, probably isn't the right way to do it. We want to be a little bit more granular and apply those retention policies at a better level. So I'll quickly go through and show you how these are created. I'll call it coast to coast for today, just so we can stick on brand. So I'll jump in there. You can see we've got three options here. So we've got 365 groups, where we select Azure AD attributes. We've got users, so this is where they're actually existing within Azure AD, not necessarily in 365. And we've got SharePoint sites. So if we use users for this example, we can see some of the attributes I spoke about before. So we've got display name if you wanted to be really granular and target specific users. Not normally a common practice, but we can. We can do state or province. We can do postcode. So let's say we just wanted the people within Perth, for example. We could go up and we could hit city. We could say it's equal to Perth. More appropriate to me, less appropriate to Lou. And we can add other attributes in here as well. And this can be an and/or search. So we can say they have to be in Perth and they also need to, let's say, exist within the SOC team as a department. This then, you can also do advanced queries within here where you start entering some of the OPATH queries. It can get fairly complex, so I recommend using the simple query builders at least first, unless you're quite confident into it. But you can go do some reading and build out some fairly complex queries to start tailoring these really granularly, and then we can build out that policy there. When it comes to applying that policy, we'll do it as we would normally build out a retention policy when they were static scoped before. So we'd hit new retention policy here. You can call it coast to coast. And then we can see now we've got two different options, right? We've got the adaptive scoping and we've got the static scoping. Once we jump in here, we add whatever scopes that we want to start targeting that to the user. Just quickly while I cover that, you can see all of these different options here are going to be available or unavailable depending on the scope I add. So if I add, let's say, a SharePoint specific scope, that's going to populate some of these other controls based around SharePoint. If I add a user specific scope, let's say staff in Germany, that's going to start populating the user specific stuff. So now when I roll this out, this retention policy that I configure next will only be applied to people in Germany within the IT department, as long as those attributes are configured within Azure AD. If they're not configured in Azure AD, it's not going to matter what policies or procedures you put in here. It's not going to apply to anyone. So just make sure that your Azure AD is structured in a way that you can start segmenting those users out. And after this, we've got the same things that we typically have in a retention policy. We've got the time to retain that specific data. We've got when that retention period is going to start on, whether that file was first created or the time it was last modified. We can delete those items automatically. We can keep that data there. So when it hits the end of that 7-year cycle, nothing happens to that data. It can just be manually deleted if we want to. We can retain those items until the end of time. If these things are deemed appropriate, we might want to do that for things like board papers or other company sensitive information that we don't necessarily have to keep for a regulatory requirement, but that the business wants to retain. Or we can only delete items when they reach a certain age as well. So we can let that 7 years expire and then we're able to delete that data, and we can do it based on that period too. As we can see here, there's a couple in here that's already been created. 2 of these are static. One of these are the adaptive scope that I've done. Once this loads up, we can see that where it's been scoped to and when it's being built out. And it's trying to translate, so that's good. Figured out was German. So we also have policy lookup. I'm not going to dive into it now, but it's where we can start putting people's usernames, email addresses, SharePoint sites, and it will give you a list of what retention policies have been applied to that particular location. So that's a really, really quick, easy way to go back, map that out, and get that information back.
That's a great feature, isn't it?
Yeah, it saved a lot of people a lot of time. It was a lot more manual before. But now it's come back. So we've kind of given that emphasis back to the user to be able to go back and have a look and see where these are applied. And with that, I think we'll move over to our toy box segment. So this segment is just a bit of fun that we wanted to add onto the rest, where me and Lou talk about something non-IT related, non-security related. This is a bit more about us and what we're interested in, so you guys can get to know us a bit more. And with that, I will hand over to Lou.
Bo, you know I like my toys.
I do.
You know I like my music. You also know that I'm a little bit advanced in age, and I do remember when drum machines were actual machines, physical things. And so I spent a lot of time playing with virtual musical instruments, and, you know, trying to hit drum pads on a screen is not much fun, which is why I got this guy. Now, any one of you who's been around for a little while will sort of recognize the layout of this. It looks a lot like a Roland drum machine. It's not the best part, mate. You know what the best part is? This is the best bit.
Go on.
Best bit is finding the USB port, which is on the other side. Here we go.
You'll have to flip it twice.
Colors.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, it's cool. Anyway, it's good fun because obviously with this guy, I'm hitting pads instead of having to deal with screen and virtual machines, and that's my toy for the week. Bo, what have you got in your toy box?
Great toy, Lou. So I guess before I was speaking how I am recently rediscovered my love of Lego, we're doing a lot of those, I guess, the adult sets, so Star Wars stuff like that, all within like 500 plus pieces of Lego to build them out. This is the thing that we've recently created is a Stormtrooper helmet. It's 500 plus pieces of Lego in there. It does all the internals, everything's built in within the helmet as well. So I've just bought another droid piece, which I think is 1,200 pieces that we're building over the weekend. So eventually, the background of my coast to coast thing, I'm hoping, will just be a wall of Lego, and I can just show that off instead.
I'm looking forward to it.
That'll be great.
And with that, let's close up.
I think hopefully everyone enjoyed this. Thanks for everyone that tuned in today. I know it's our first show. There's plenty more to come. We're going to start bringing in guests. We're going to start going a bit deeper in some of these things, depending on what you guys come back to us with feedback. So if you want to see something particularly and it's really interesting for you, feel free to give us both feedback and we can build that into the next session. And I'll hand over to Lou to close out.
So next time, more cool stuff to show and tell. As Bo said, we'll have a guest of our choosing. If you've got any special requests for guests, let me know as well. But part of this is also to help you guys get to know your local compliance team here at Microsoft Australia, both sides of the equation, both sides of the country. But also, I'm thinking maybe even New Zealand at some point. We might drag someone over the ditch and see how we go with that.
Yeah, I reckon that's a good idea.
See you all later. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.